My sister sold the vintage Mustang I'd spent 3 years restoring, and my dad said, "Stop crying over metal. She has bigger plans for the cash." The buyer had just reached for the keys when I opened one folder, looked at him, and said, "You just bought stolen property." His smile dropped before my dad's did. Hey, I'm not going to make a big thing out of this, but if you enjoy what we do here, subscribing is the one thing that keeps the channel alive. It's free, it's fast, and it genuinely matters. Thanks for being here. Let's jump in. My father held the garage door open. That's the part one keep coming back to. My sister found the buyer, copied the key, set the price, and handled the handoff. But my father, the man who watched me spend 3 years in that garage with grease on my hands and parts catalog stacked on the workbench, held the door open so a stranger could back the car out and drive away. He held it the way you hold a door for a delivery driver, like the car was a package being picked up instead of something his son had built with 3 years of his life. I need to go back to the beginning to explain why a car can matter this much to a person. Why someone would spend every weekend for 3 years covered in grease and brake dust and engine oil. Why the sound of an engine turning over for the first time can make a grown man's hands shake. And why a father holding a garage door open for the wrong person can be the thing that breaks a family apart. I was 24 when I found it at a salvage yard outside of Dalton. I'd been driving past the yard every other week on my way to a job site, and I always slowed down to look at what was sitting in the rows. One Saturday, I saw a shape under a tarp that made me pull over. The yard owner walked me over to it and pulled the tarp off, and underneath was a 1967 Mustang Fastback sitting on 4 flat tires. No engine, no interior, no glass, just a body and a frame and a VIN plate and 50 years of rust. How much? I asked. $2,200. I had $2,400 in my savings account. I'd been putting away $200 a month for my warehouse job for a year, not for anything specific, just because saving was the one discipline I had that nobody in my family needed from me or asked about or tried to redirect towards someone else's problem. I'll take it. The tow cost me the remaining $200. I had the flatbed drop it in my garage, and I stood there looking at it for about 20 minutes after the driver left, this rusted shell sitting under a fluorescent shop light, and I thought, I'm going to make this thing run. I didn't tell my family, not because it was a secret, because I already knew what they'd say. The first 6 months, all I did was take things apart. Every piece that came off the frame got logged in a binder I kept on the workbench shelf. Part name, condition, whether it was worth saving or needed replacing, where I could source a replacement, and what it would cost. The binder got thick fast. Parts started arriving from all over the country. An intake manifold from a guy in Tennessee who shipped it wrapped in newspaper inside a feed bag. A set of taillights from a widow in Oregon who'd been storing her late husband's Mustang parts in her basement for 20 years. She sold them to me for $140 and said her husband would have liked knowing they went to someone building one by hand. Every package that arrived got opened on the workbench, inspected, logged in the binder, and stored on the shelf I'd built specifically for incoming parts. The shelf filled up over 6 months. The binder filled up faster. By the end of that first phase, I had a car stripped to its skeleton and a binder that documented every bone. The engine was a 289 V8 I found at a yard in Alabama. I rented a trailer on a Friday night and drove 6 hours south the next morning. The yard was run by a man in his 70s named Curtis who walked with a limp and wore a hat that said Ford on it in letters so faded you could barely read them. He asked me what I was building. I told him. He walked me to the block, patted the side of it with his palm, and said, "My son started one of these back in '94. Never finished. Life got in the way." He paused. "Finish yours." I told him I would. He loaded the block into my trailer with a forklift that looked older than both of us. I paid him $1,800 in cash and shook his hand and drove 6 hours home with a 600-pound engine block rattling behind me on a highway I'd never driven before. When I got home, I backed the trailer into the garage and spent 2 hours getting the block onto an engine stand with a chain hoist I'd borrowed from a coworker. It was midnight by the time it was secure. I stood in the garage looking at it under the shop light, this iron block that was going to become the heart of something I was building from nothing, and I ate a cold sandwich and went to bed. It took 4 months to rebuild the engine. I worked on it every Saturday and most Sundays, following a Haynes manual I'd bought for $30 and a series of forum posts from guys who'd done the same rebuild and posted photos of every step. The first time I fired it up, it ran rough. Uneven idle, misfiring on 2 cylinders. The valve timing was off. I spent a weekend diagnosing it, took the whole top end apart again, reset the timing chain, and reassembled everything from scratch. The second time I fired it up, it caught on the first try and settled into an idle so clean and steady that the tools on the pegboard stopped rattling, and the coffee cup on the workbench stopped vibrating, and the garage was filled with a sound that was deep and even and right. That was a Sunday morning in November, cold enough that my breath mixed with the exhaust. I stood there listening to it with my hands shaking. Hank heard it from his porch next door. He walked over and stood in the driveway and listened for half a minute. "That sounds right," he said. "Yeah," I said. "It does." He went back to his coffee. I stayed in the garage for another hour, just listening to it idle, adjusting the carburetor by quarter turns, getting it perfect. Nobody else came. Nobody else knew. My father came by one Saturday about 8 months into the build. He'd driven over to drop off a casserole dish my stepmother wanted returned, and he walked through the garage to get to the back door, which meant he had to walk past the car. He stopped, looked at the engine on the stand, looked at the parts organized in rows on the floor, looked at the binder open on the workbench with receipts and photos taped to the pages. "How much have you spent on this so far?" I told him. He made a sound through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sigh. The sound men make when they think someone is wasting money on something they don't understand. "You could have put that toward a down payment on a house. Or invested it. Something real." "This is real, Dad. It's a hobby, Cole. It's metal and rubber. It's a 1967 Mustang that I'm rebuilding from the frame up. And when you're done, it'll sit in this garage and depreciate." "It won't depreciate. It's already worth more than I've put into it." He shrugged. That specific shrug that means, I'm done talking about something I've already decided doesn't matter. He picked up the casserole dish from the workbench and walked out without offering to help, without asking to see the engine run, without touching a single part or opening a single page of the binder he'd walked past. He drove to Paige's apartment afterward. I know because he mentioned it at dinner the next week. She'd needed curtain rods hung. He'd spent an hour there with a drill. He described it like it was a productive afternoon. Around the same time I was sourcing the interior kit, Paige needed $3,000 for a security deposit. Her roommate had moved out and the lease was in the roommate's name, and suddenly Paige needed a new apartment fast. She called my father on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the money was in her account. From his savings. No repayment plan. No questions. No hesitation. I found out about it at a family dinner the following Sunday. My father mentioned it between bites of pot roast the way he mentions everything he does for Paige, casually, like it was obvious, like it was weather. "Helped your sister get into the new place. She's doing well." "That's great," I said. And I meant it. I wanted Paige to do well. What I didn't want was to think about what had happened 6 months before that dinner, when I'd sat at the same table and asked for help with the transmission part. The transmission component cost $1,100. It was a specific part that had to come from a specific vendor, and I was $400 short after paying rent. I asked my father for a loan. Not a gift. A loan. I told him I'd pay it back in 3 months. He looked at me across the dinner table. Same table. Same chair. Same kitchen. "You've got a job, Cole. Figure it out." 5 words. No discussion. No follow-up question about what the part was for or why I needed it or whether 3 months was a reasonable timeline. Just 5 words and a return to his plate. I figured it out. I sold some tools I wasn't using to a guy at work. I picked up a weekend shift at the warehouse that meant missing 2 Saturdays in the garage. I ordered the part myself and installed it on a Sunday afternoon while my father was at Paige's apartment helping her rearrange furniture. The transmission went in clean. I didn't bring it up again. But I filed the interaction in the same place I file everything my family does that tells me where I stand. Not in anger. In clarity. My father would give Paige $3,000 for a deposit without a question and tell me to figure out $1,100 on my own. That wasn't a contradiction. That was a policy. At a family dinner around the 2-year mark, I mentioned the car. I said the interior was almost done and the paint was next. I was genuinely excited. I wanted someone at that table to care. My father nodded without looking up from his plate. Paige said, "How much have you spent on it now?" Not, "How's it going?" or "Can I see it?" Just the dollar amount. I told her. She raised her eyebrows. "That's a lot of money for something that sits in a garage." My father said, "It's not practical." The conversation moved to Paige's new job. My father asked her 3 follow-up questions about it. Nobody asked a follow-up question about the car. I ate the rest of my dinner and drove home and went straight to the garage and sat in the driver's seat of the unfinished Mustang with no paint and no dashboard and no windshield, and I just sat there for about 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, looking through the empty frame where the glass would go. The car didn't need me to explain why it mattered. The car just needed me to keep building it. A year before the $5,000 request, Paige borrowed my laptop. She said she needed it for a week to finish some job applications. I said okay. A week turned into 3 weeks. I texted her, "Hey, when can I get the laptop back?" She said she still needed it. A month passed. I called. She said she'd bring it by the weekend. The weekend came and went. I asked again. She said, "I'm almost done with it." At 6 weeks, I told my father I needed the laptop back and asked him to say something to her since she wasn't listening to me. "Come on, Cole. She's using it for work. Don't make a big deal." The laptop came back at the 3-month mark. The hinge was cracked. The charger was missing. The screen had a scratch across the bottom corner. Nobody offered to fix or replace anything. I bought a new charger for $45. I fixed the hinge with electrical tape that's still on it today. And I learned something that I should have learned earlier. Paige borrows things. She doesn't return them on time, in the condition she received them, or with any acknowledgement that they weren't hers to begin with. And my father's job, as he sees it, is to make sure I don't complain about it too loudly. The paint was the last major phase. I'd done the bodywork myself, filling rust holes, sanding, priming, sanding again until the panels were smooth enough to run my palm across without catching. But the paint had to be professional because the color mattered. Highland green, original 1967 factory color. The exact shade the car wore when it rolled off the line 50 years before I found it sitting on flat tires in a salvage yard. The paint shop charged $4,200. I'd been saving for it separately, in an envelope in my dresser drawer, because banks make it too easy to move money around when someone asks for it, and envelopes don't have transfer buttons. When I drove the car out of the shop and parked it in my driveway with the sun hitting the hood, the green was so deep it looked wet. I sat on the front steps and looked at it for 10 minutes. Hank walked over with 2 beers, handed me one. We sat together looking at a car that had taken 3 years to go from a rusted shell to something that belonged in a magazine. "Damn, Cole," he said. 3 years. Every weekend. Every dollar. $36,000 total. Appraised at $38,000. Title in my name. Registration in my name. Insurance in my name. Binder on the shelf with every receipt from every state. The car was mine in every way a thing can belong to a person. 6 months before the sale, Paige called me on a Tuesday night. I was in the garage replacing brake pads. The phone was on speaker, propped against a toolbox. "I need a favor." "What kind?" "I'm 3 months behind on my car payments. They'll repo it if I don't catch up by the end of the month. I need $5,000. "I don't have $5,000 to lend, Paige. You spent $36,000 on that car. You have money. That money's in the car. It's not in an account. So sell a part. Take a loan against it. Figure something out." The phrase, "figure something out," hit different coming from her. That was the phrase my father had used when I needed $1,100, and he had $3,000 for Paige the same year. Now she was using it on me, like the phrase was hereditary. "I'm not taking the car apart to cover your car payments. You'd rather have a car in a garage that you drive twice a month than help your own sister? I'd rather not lend money that doesn't come back. The laptop you borrowed is still cracked, by the way." Silence. Not the kind that means someone accepted a no. The kind that means someone just changed strategies without telling you. "Okay," she said. "I understand." She hung up. I went back to the brake pads. I thought the conversation was over. It wasn't. That flat, "I understand," was the first step in a plan that would take 6 months to build and 4 minutes to collapse. I just didn't know it yet. I found this out later, after everything happened. She had the spare key copied on March 14th. The spare hung on a hook by the garage door, the one I kept there in case I locked myself out during a weekend session. She went to a hardware store 2 towns over. Not the one near her apartment. Not the one near my house. A different one, where nobody would recognize her. She paid cash. The store had a receipt in their system with the date and a description. Key copy. Auto. Brass. March 14th was 2 weeks after I told her I couldn't lend her $5,000. She'd been carrying a copy of my car key in her purse for 6 months. Every time she came to the house for a visit, every time she sat in my kitchen drinking coffee, every time she walked past the garage on her way to the backyard, the key was in her purse. Waiting. 3 weeks before the sale, she listed the car on 2 online forums. She used photos she'd taken inside my garage during visits I didn't know had a second purpose. The listing described the car accurately enough to attract a serious buyer. 1967 Mustang Fastback, 289 V8, full restoration, Highland Green, clean title. But the contact information was a prepaid phone number she'd set up for this purpose. Nothing in the listing traced back to my name. She priced it at $22,000. The car was appraised at $38,000. She wasn't trying to get market value. She was trying to get cash fast, before I got home, before the buyer asked too many questions, before anyone in the transaction had time to think about why a fully restored Mustang was being sold for $16,000 less than it was worth. The week before the sale, Paige texted me. "You working this weekend?" "Yeah. Saturday morning shift." Thumbs up emoji. That was it. 4 words and an emoji. The most efficient piece of reconnaissance I've ever been the target of. She now knew I'd be 20 miles away on Saturday morning, clocked in at a warehouse, unreachable for at least 5 hours. She had the key, the listing, the buyer, and the schedule. The only piece she was missing was someone to hold the garage door open. She called my father that night. Saturday, 8:30 a.m. Paige pulled up to my house in her own car with the copied key in her purse. She let herself into the garage through the side door, started the Mustang with the copied key, and let it warm up while she waited. My father arrived at 8:45. Paige had told him she needed help with something at Cole's place. He didn't ask what. He never asks what when Paige calls. He just shows up because that's what he does for her. When he saw the Mustang running in the garage, he must have understood what was happening. A car that his son built, idling in a garage that his son owns, being prepared for a handoff that his son didn't know about. He understood it, and he stayed anyway. He stayed, and he held the door. At 9:15, a white pickup truck pulled up to the curb. Rick got out. Mid-40s, polo shirt, clean shoes, cashier's check in his shirt pocket. He walked up the driveway, and Paige met him with a handshake and a smile, and started showing him the car like it was hers. She opened the hood. She pointed at the engine. She ran her hand along the fender the way I run my hand along the fender, and watching her do it later on Hank's security camera was like watching someone forge my signature. 9:22 a.m. My phone buzzed in my pocket while I was unloading a pallet. I pulled it out. "Hank, hey Cole. Someone's backing your Mustang out of the garage. Your dad's here holding the door. Everything okay?" I read it once. Read it again. "Someone is backing your Mustang out. Your dad is holding the door." The words didn't arrange themselves into meaning right away. They just sat on the screen like a sentence in a language I almost spoke. Then they clicked, and the click felt like a door slamming inside my chest. I pocketed the phone, walked across the warehouse floor to my supervisor's office. Didn't run. Running would have meant panic, and I wasn't there yet. I was somewhere between confusion and the kind of anger that doesn't have a sound. "Family emergency," I said. He looked at my face. "Go." I was in my truck and on the road in 3 minutes. The drive takes 20 minutes in normal traffic. I did it in 14. I called Hank from the highway. He picked up immediately. "What's happening now?" Guys in the driveway looking at the car. Your sister's showing him the interior. Your dad's standing by the garage with his arms crossed. Is the car still there? Still in the driveway. Engine's running. If anyone tries to leave with it, get the plate. Already have it. Hank didn't ask me to explain. He'd watched me build that car for 3 years from his side of the fence. He'd heard the engine turn over. He'd sat on my steps with a beer and looked at the paint. He knew what was in that garage and whose name was on the title. I drove with both hands tied on the wheel. The folder was in the glove compartment where it had been for 2 years. Title, registration, insurance card, USB drive with dated photos of every stage of the restoration. During the drive, the confusion settled, and what replaced it was something colder. My sister had copied my key, found a buyer, timed it for my shift, and my father had driven to my house on a Saturday morning to hold the garage door open. This wasn't a spontaneous family argument. This was a plan, built step by step over 6 months. The same way I'd built the car, except what I built was worth keeping, and what they built was designed to take it. I turned onto my street at 9:36. 3 houses away, I could see the Mustang in the driveway. Highland green, catching the morning sun. Exhaust pulsing in that low idle I'd tuned to 650 revolutions per minute. Rick had his hand on the roof, the way people touch a car they're about to own. Paige was next to him, holding a piece of paper. My father was by the open garage door, arms crossed, face set in that expression he wears when he's decided something is under control. I parked at the curb, grabbed the folder from the glove compartment, got out, closed the door quietly, walked up the driveway at a normal pace. Folder in my left hand, car keys in my right. The real keys, the originals, the ones that had started that engine 100 times over 3 years. 3 faces turned toward me at the same time. Paige went from surprise to calculating in about 1 second. The look of someone trying to figure out if the plan can still work if she talks fast enough. Rick looked confused. He didn't know who I was. My father uncrossed his arms and let them hang. The first honest thing his body did all morning. I walked past Paige and my father and went straight to Rick. He was the only person in this driveway who could still be reasoned with. I'm Cole Briggs. I own this house and this car. Rick looked at Paige. She opened her mouth. I was already opening the folder. Title: State of Georgia. Owner: Cole Andrew Briggs. Title: My name. Always has been. Registration: Same name. Same VIN. Registration. Insurance card. My policy. My payments. Rick's hand came off the roof of the car. Slow. The way you pull away from something you just learned might not be yours. Did she show you a title? He looked at Paige. She said the paperwork was being mailed. She'd send it within the week. There's no paperwork being mailed. This is the only title. She's my sister. She doesn't own this car. She never has. Rick's expression changed the way faces change when a deal that seemed too good reveals why it was too good. The eagerness drained out. What replaced it was the specific discomfort of a man who just realized he was standing in the middle of something that had a police report attached to it. You just bought stolen property, I said. Not loud. The way you'd read a number off a receipt. 2 faces changed at the same time. Rick went from uncomfortable to alarmed in about 1 second. My father took longer. His moved in stages, like a man watching a building lean before it falls. Confusion first, then discomfort. Then something he tried to cover by putting his hands in his pockets. Paige spoke first. She always speaks first. Cole, you're overreacting. I was going to tell you. I was going to split the money. Split the money. From selling my car. That you stole. I didn't steal it. It's been sitting in the garage. My garage. My title. My insurance. She turned to Rick. Actually turned to him and tried to keep the sale alive. Look, this is a family thing. The car's fine. The deal's fine. He's just upset. Rick looked at her, then at the title in my hand, then at her again. Ma'am, that title says his name, not yours. The paperwork is complicated. It's technically both of ours. It's technically mine, I said. There's no both. There never was. Rick straightened up. I want my check back. Now. Paige looked at the cashier's check in her hands. Her fingers tightened on it for 2 seconds. Everyone in the driveway saw the grip. Then Rick reached for it, and the look on his face made it clear this was not a negotiation. She let go. Rick folded the check into his pocket. He looked at me. Sorry about this, man. Then he walked to his truck and drove away without looking back. The driveway was quieter now. Just us. The Mustang still idling. The garage still open. The morning sun hitting the paint I'd paid $4,200 for with money from an envelope in my dresser drawer. My father spoke for the first time. Cole, stop crying over metal. Your sister needs the money more than you need a hobby car. It's not metal, Dad. It's 3 years. 3 years of what? Weekends in a garage. 3 years of every weekend and every dollar, while you gave Paige $3,000 without blinking and told me to figure out $1,100 on my own. That's different. How? He didn't answer. The reasons he had were the ones he couldn't say out loud without hearing how they sounded. She was going to pay you back, he tried. She sold a $38,000 car for $22,000 so the buyer would move fast before I got home. That's not paying me back. That's theft. Don't use that word about your sister. That's the word, Dad. That's the legal word for what happened in this driveway. The title in this folder would say the same thing in front of a judge. He went quiet. The word judge did something that theft hadn't managed. It moved the conversation from a family argument to a room with consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. I turned to Paige. You copied the key in March. Hardware store in Milford. Cash. March 14th. 2 weeks after I said no to the $5,000. Her face went still. You took photos of the car from inside my garage. You listed it on 2 forums 3 weeks ago at $16,000 below market value. You texted me last week to ask if I was working Saturday, and you called Dad to hold the door. I said each piece separately, not a speech, a list, each item landing on its own before the next one arrived. 6 months of planning, I said. Same amount of time it took me to strip the car down to the frame when I started building it. My father looked at Paige. Something in his face shifted, something that might have been the first crack in the version of events she'd given him. She'd told him they'd worked it out. She'd told him Cole agreed. Now the timeline was on the driveway between them, and timelines don't lie the way people do. I needed that money, Cole. Paige's voice was smaller now. I'm behind on everything. Every month I fall further behind, and every month I think it'll get better, and it doesn't. You asked me for $5,000, and I said no. So instead of asking someone else or selling your own things or finding another way, you copied my key and sold my car. Because you said no. I'm allowed to say no, Paige. She looked at the Mustang still idling in the driveway. The car she'd listed on 2 forums and priced to sell fast, and drove out of my garage with a key she'd been hiding in her purse for half a year. I'm your sister. I know. That makes it worse. She didn't say anything after that. Her arms dropped to her sides. I turned to my father. You knew this was my car. I know. You watched me build it for 3 years. I know. You held the door open. He looked at the concrete. The same concrete where the oil stain sits. The same driveway he'd walked across 100 times. You held the door open, I said again. Same volume. This time it was the verdict. Paige tried one more thing. She stepped toward me and lowered her voice. What if I pay you for it? Over time. Monthly. You're 3 months behind on your own car payment. You couldn't pay me $5,000 6 months ago. She didn't have a number for that. I'm driving the car back in the garage, I said. I'm changing the locks today. If either of you come onto this property without my permission, I'm filing a report. Not a conversation. A report. With the title, the key receipt, the listing screenshots, and the text where you asked about my work schedule. My father said, Cole, let's talk about this. We just did. I got in the Mustang, adjusted the mirror, backed it slowly into the garage, past the workbench, past the tool shelf, past the binder. The engine echoed off the walls the way it always does. I turned off the ignition, got out, and for the first time in 3 years, I locked the garage from the inside before walking out the side door. I went to the hardware store the next morning, bought a deadbolt, a padlock, and a new knob for the side entrance. Spent 2 hours installing everything with a drill and a screwdriver while the Mustang sat behind me in its spot. I took the spare key hook off the wall and dropped it in the kitchen trash. That hook had held the key my sister used to plan a 6-month theft. It wasn't going to hold anything again. When I was done, I tested every lock twice. Then I sat on the garage floor with my back against the bumper and drank a glass of water and looked at the space I'd built the car in and thought about the fact that I now had to lock my own family out of my own property because one of them copied a key and the other held the door. Paige didn't call, text, or show up for 3 weeks. The sister who'd spent 6 months planning went completely silent once the plan collapsed. I don't know if the silence was shame or strategy. I didn't care which. The locks were changed. The key hook was gone. The listing was reported and taken down. My father called 5 days after the driveway. I've been thinking about Saturday. Okay. When Paige asked me to come over, she told me you two had worked it out. She said you agreed to let her sell the car, and you just couldn't be there for the handoff. Did you call me to check? No. You drove to my house, held the garage door, watched a stranger back out a car you've seen me work on for 3 years, and you never picked up the phone. I could hear his television in the background. He was in his recliner. He'd probably been sitting there for an hour before making this call. I should have asked. You should have. But you also never asked about the car when I was building it. You never asked what it cost or what it meant. You came by once in 3 years and called it metal. Then you held the door while someone tried to take it. Silence. I'm sorry, Cole. I know. The call ended. He didn't ask to come over. I didn't invite him. Somewhere between I should have asked and I'm sorry was the space where our relationship used to be, and neither of us knew how to get back into it. Hank came over the next Saturday with 2 beers and a bag of peanuts. He sat on the front steps and handed me one without saying a word about what had happened. We talked about the weather, a dog he'd seen walking itself down the block, whether the city was ever going to fix the pothole on the corner. 20 minutes of ordinary conversation, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you except being present, which was exactly what I needed from the one person who'd been present the entire time. He finished his beer, stood up, brushed the peanut shells off his jeans. "Car sounds good, Cole." Then he walked home. That evening, I went to the garage. The Mustang was in its spot. The oil stain underneath lined up with the engine block, the dark shape on the concrete matching the car like a shadow that doesn't move. I walked around it once, ran my hand along the fender, across the hood, down the quarter panel. No scratches. Rick had been careful with it, which was the one decent thing about the whole day. I opened the binder on the workbench, flipped through a few pages. Tennessee, Oregon, Alabama. Receipts and invoices and dated photos and billed notes in my own handwriting from Saturday mornings when I was 25 and had grease under my nails and a cold sandwich on the bench and nowhere I'd rather be. I closed the binder, put it back on the shelf. Then I grabbed the garage door handle from the inside and pulled it down. The metal panels folded into each other one by one until the last one touched the concrete. Quiet. Final. Same door my father had held open that morning. Closed now. From the inside, by the person who built what was behind it. I turned off the shop light, stood in the dark for a second, engine ticking as it cooled, smell of oil and paint and concrete. I locked the side door on my way out and went inside to make dinner.